And so when she told me that she got started as a promoter that led her to running the Mall of America, and then eventually being selected by the state of Minnesota to be the host of the Super Bowl committee, I thought, hey, this is a woman that I can connect to. So it's really fun to introduce you to somebody that is extraordinarily talented in a number of ways, and I can tell you this. She planned a wedding and the Super Bowl at the same time. So let me introduce you to Maureen Bausch.
Thanks so much, Paul. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here with you today and talk to you about both the Super Bowl and how I got to be at the Super Bowl. It's a wonderful group of people, and I had the pleasure of listening to Beth last week, and she was just marvelous. I hope I can live up to her speech. But I really don't like talking about myself. I'd much rather talk to you about the Super Bowl. But I would like to talk about the Super Bowl for 2 minutes, just because I think it helps explain how and why I took this job. You see, when you open the book, and it's only about this thick on how to run a Super Bowl, the very first line in it says, "It's not about the game." I was like, oh, thank God. Because I do not know enough about football, right, Tanya, to do a game. It said it's a platform, and the NFL gives you this platform of about $500 million to promote your region, along with the Super Bowl. I thought that I could do. And so I got to the Super Bowl, and I met the Super Bowl host committee, and I met with some of the best CMOs in the market. And I said, how can the Super Bowl work to help you achieve your goals? And they said, some of the hardest things we do are attract highly skilled employees to Minnesota, tourists in the winter months, businesses to support our economy. And if you could figure out a way to do that, that would be great. They said, media has not been our friend. Fargo, Grumpy Old Men, New in Town. They position us as very cold and talking funny. And we do, but we're a lot more than that. We're culturally progressive. Our arts and theater are second to none. The cuisine is remarkable. And, you know, the philanthropy, you know it best in this room. Our corporations, your corporations, have had launched so many innovations. We rank among the top in the country. And that's what the world has to know about Minnesota, and we can use the Super Bowl and the platform they give us to tell the world. We are Super Bowl 52, and we'll be promoting for 52 weeks Minnesota, starting the day after the Houston game. And then we'll end with the 10-day Bold North Festival, which we'll market to our friends in the Midwest and Canada, just like we used to at Mall of America. And believe me, we're a southern destination in February for many. And they will come. It works if you're in Canada. And we will sell it. And most importantly, and near and dear to my heart, is we can leave a legacy. And in the bid book, it was very generic. It was for the health and wellness of Minnesota children. And we get to leave a legacy through the resources we have at the Super Bowl to help kids all over Minnesota. So in 1976, when I graduated from UMD as a teacher, and if you would have said, you're going to be running the Super Bowl in 2016, I would have said, you've had too many beers. Or you've smoked something, because that is never going to happen. And, but it did, and it started in Stillwater, Minnesota. I was born there, the oldest girl in a large Irish Catholic family, and if you read the characteristics of an oldest girl, I have most of them. I'm organized, I'm responsible, I love to make lists. There's nothing better than a good list, and checking it off as you go through. I think my siblings would have said I was bossy. I don't think I'm bossy. But you had to be a leader very early because your parents gave you responsibility. You had to babysit as early as I can remember. I was babysitting. And Stillwater in those days was really more like a Norman Rockwell village. It was something out of a painting. It was small, it was safe. There were characters in town and there were traditions. My family owned the grocery store. And so when someone died, you always delivered a spiral cut ham to their home. And it was a tradition. When you saw Lena walking down the highway, you always stopped to ask her for a ride because she limped. Sometimes she'd swear at you and tell you to get out of there. And sometimes she'd jump in your car. And you never knew, but you always stopped and asked. And you visited your grandparents Sunday after church and during the week on your bike. And most importantly, you never embarrassed the family, which I do have a game plan for. So, and it was the 60s, and the women's movement hadn't made it to Stillwater, Minnesota in the 60s. So when I graduated from high school in the early 70s, my mother said, well, you could be a teacher, a nun, a nurse, or a home ec major. I mean, that was my choice. I didn't know. I was the oldest girl. I was like, okay, well, I don't like blood. I don't think I'd be a good nun. And I think I got a C- in home ec. So I picked teaching. And that's about as much thought as I put into it, really, really. And I went to UMD and graduated in elementary education. And their technique back then for classroom discipline was to carry a poem in your pocket. And there weren't many jobs in Minnesota, so a bunch of us graduates moved to Arizona. It was warm. We had been in Duluth for a few years. We thought this looks good. And two of us actually got a job in the same school. And I got a fourth grade class. And the principal, in all of his wisdom, put 34 kids with disciplinary problems in one room. And then they hired the girl from Duluth with a poem in her pocket. That didn't work. I knew the first day that wasn't going to work. These kids were great, though. They were mostly kids of parents who worked in the fields. It was a migrant school. They were wonderful kids. They were brilliant. It was a challenging year. I think I learned more from them than they learned from me. And I think they went on to do some great things. But after 1 year, I decided I miss Minnesota. I love those kids, and I would have gone back in a minute, but I wanted to come home, and I was offered a long-term sub position in Hastings. And so I took it, and then that grew into an offer for a job to teach gifted and talented kids the next year. So I went back to graduate school at the university and started my graduate work in gifted and talented education. And in August of that year, right before we opened our doors, we lost our federal funding. And I didn't know why. I was the teacher. I didn't know if the paperwork hadn't been filled out or what happened. But I knew I was out of a job. And I had to pay the rent. So I had to go to work for my dad as his secretary. And that was not my goal. That was not my career plan. Unfortunately, it's a title I still hold today. And Cub was growing fast at the time, and they needed the help. And I wasn't going to give up teaching. But I thought, well, I could do this for a while just to pay the rent. And I remember sitting in the lunchroom, and our accountant, Roger Ritten, came in, and I said, oh, it's just not fair. It's just not fair that I am not teaching. And he said, when did you think life was fair? Who told you life was fair? And it just hit me. I am sure I had been told that before, because I just didn't hear it. And I was like, you know what? I guess I'm not entitled to anything. You're absolutely right. Life isn't necessarily fair. No one gives you the right. I better make the most of what I have, which is working at Cub right now until I can find another teaching job. And it just, I think people come into your life with different messages at different times when you can actually hear them. That wasn't the first time I heard life wasn't fair, but for some reason that day it hit me. And it changed my life because I stopped complaining and started making the best of what I was given. And my cousin John, because we were all in the family business at that point, was my first mentor. And he said, why don't you run the sampling program in the stores? And I said, well, all right, because basically, I would go to all 5 Cub stores and I'd hire women mostly who were retired, and we'd set up Charmin boxes and cover it with corrugated paper, the tie to teaching, because you use corrugated board on the bulletin board. I could do this. And I ended up working with the most marvelous group of women. There were 25 in all. I learned my management skills from them. They stood on their feet for 8 hours a day. They sold whether it be strawberries or kiwi or hot dogs or whatever, cheese and crackers, whatever we were demoing. And they taught me the greatest lesson I have in leadership, and that's managing from the heart. Because if they didn't like their job, they weren't going to sell the cheese and crackers. And if I was caring and nice to them, they were in turn nice and caring to our customers. And people don't buy things from people they don't like. And so these women were the most wonderful group of women, and they taught me so much about managing people. And it's a philosophy that I've carried through all my jobs, and it's managing from the heart. And as long as I can do that, I can sleep at night. People like their jobs, hopefully. It's not 100%, but they like their jobs, and in turn, the customers like to buy from them. So I worked for Cub for a long time. And after about early in my career, my cousin John again said, you know, you were an art minor. Why don't you come to a meeting with me with our advertising agency? So I did. I walked into that agency. It was Paragon at the time. And I fell in love with marketing on that day. And I never thought about teaching again. I was home. I was like, oh my God, I never took a business class in my life. And all of a sudden, I found this exciting field of advertising, and I switched my master's degree to marketing and journalism, and I learned most of my skills on the job from my cousin John and from the advertising agencies that we worked with. And I worked there for 13 years, and we expanded the company from 5 stores to 85 stores. And we went as far west as Portland, far south as Atlanta, to Chicago and Indianapolis, and many states in between. I was able to go in and open markets and learn about the people, learn how they shopped, learn what appealed to them. Advertised a whole lot of strawberries. And one time we even made the ad smell like strawberries. I don't think the Star Tribune has ever forgiven me. So if you ever see bad articles about the Super Bowl, it's really about those strawberries. But don't ever think it's really about the Super Bowl. So anyway, after 13 years, I could not think of another way to advertise strawberries, and I read about Mall of America with 500 stores, and I thought, oh my God, for a marketer, that was a dream. And so I called them up, and I recognized some of the names from our work in Chicago and Indianapolis. And I said, do you need some help? And they said yes. And 24 interviews later, I got the job. I'm really not a good interviewer. And I started in public relations, and the mall was owned by the Gramasians and Simon at that time. TIAA was just being brought in. And the Gramasians were from Persia, and they had ended up in Western Canada. But they were really Persian. And they said in their very thick accent, they don't understand us. You make them understand that this is going to be successful. Make them like us. Go to the villages and get the people. Like, go to the villages and get the people. And I love the Gramasians. You have to understand, they're family. And I was like, is that the village of St. Paul? Or the village? Where is it? So, but they were absolutely right, and I did. And on opening day, we had 150,000 people at Mall of America, and it just went up since. 13,000 people started their job on the same day. We lost many of the employees. We didn't know where they were. Anyway, but we all learned together, and I had a wonderful boss and mentor at the Mall of America, John Wheeler. And he was followed the Buddhist faith, Buddhist beliefs, and for a man that's managing the largest consumer institution in the country, that was very much of a difficult thing for him. He always used to say to me, I don't understand why people are coming here. And I'd say, but I do, and that's job security for me. But you know, he taught me to balance my life. He said, family first. And he said, our brand was the place for fun. And a brand is simply a promise you have to keep. And we had to keep that promise every time somebody walked in our door, all 100,000 a day. And he said, if we're not having fun, they're not going to have fun. And we created this wonderful environment of flexibility and family first. And we could not have done it without John as our leader. And I went from public relations to marketing to associate general manager, vice president. And then when John left, Dave and I became EVPs in his place. And during that time, my life changed tremendously, so that philosophy really helped me. The mall opened in '92. I got married that year. I had children in '94 and '95. I adopted a child in 2000. My husband went into treatment in 2001, and didn't come back. In the next 15 years, I raised the children as a single parent. So I could not have done it without John as a mentor and continued to grow in responsibility. And as I as I grew in responsibility, it became very apparent that I had to have the vision, that other people, that they were looking to me for that, and that's pretty scary. And it was in my mid-40s when my life changed. And I learned probably the second most important, well, third, I guess, because life isn't fair, manage from the heart and listen. And I was on the board of St. Catherine's at the time, and they handed out a little bookmark, and it was all about listening with open ears. And I thought, wow, that's a concept. And I stopped talking and started listening, and it was amazing how much you can learn. I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have known this at age 10. And again, I'm sure people said it to me, but it's at some point in your life you hear these things. And I started listening, and all of a sudden, it was easier to have the vision. It was easier to lead. It was easier to stay calm, particularly under pressure. And at the mall, there was a lot of pressure. When you have 100,000 people at your establishment every day, things happen. Good things, but not so good things. It was easier to stay positive. And it was also much easier to manage from the heart because you were listening to what was going on in people's lives. And that has helped me immensely. So as I grew in the position, and I learned a lot about making people happy, because that was our philosophy, and they'll have fun, I ended up being alone at the top with my colleague Dave Hazelman, who's now with me at the Super Bowl. But my friends, my family, and fitness became a real rock in my life. We walked and walked and walked and talked, and they supported me. And it does take a village. I couldn't have raised the kids without my friends and family as support. Walking kept me sane and very directed. So when my last child was ready to go off to college in 2014, I was scared to death because I had a routine now after 15 years. It was Mall of America, which was easy. The Gramasians were great. They said I could work till 100, and I knew I had a stable job, and they meant 100 because they live far past 100. And they fully intended me to work until I was 100. And I probably will go back there and work till I'm 100, I don't know. But then I was scared to death. What am I going to do when my last child goes off to college, and that empty nest syndrome, and all that. And my friends had other plans. And when Tom went off to college, they introduced me to Bill, the most wonderful man I've met, and I got married 2 weeks ago. So that was very fun. I did plan a wedding. It was mine, not my children. But anyway, it was great. And then the Vikings called, the wonderful Vikings, who we had been partners with at Mall of America for years, best partnership we ever did. And they said, what would you think about running the Super Bowl? And when they told me about it, I could use all the skills that I had and learn a whole lot more. And I thought, you know what? My kids are gone. This might be kind of fun. I get to hire a fabulous group of people. I get to work with a fabulous group of people. We have amazing chairs. And Richard Davis from US Bank, Doug Baker from Ecolab, Marilyn Carlson Nelson, Lester Bagley from the Vikings, and Michael Langley from Greater MSP. I mean, imagine getting to work with these people and then getting to hire the best and the brightest. It's a dream, really. And then Mark Wolf said something he said, you've got to have fun. And I thought, you know what? He's absolutely right. If we don't have a good time planning this, how do we expect all these people we want to attract to Minnesota to have a great time, to make memories, and to come back to live, work, and play here? So I thought, this makes sense to me. And most of all, I can make a lot of lists. I can truly and check them off, and believe me, we have lists every day. And then we can leave a wonderful legacy for our kids. So that's why I'm at the Super Bowl. Hopefully we can continue to promote Minnesota long after the Super Bowl. And I hope you'll join us in 2018 for at least 10 days of great fun. So thank you.
Thank you. So with our focus on fairness today, who didn't identify in this room with the idea that something happened that was unfair? Right? So that's the simplest discussion question we've come up with so far. Everyone in this room has overcome something that seemed unfair at some point to become the marvelous person that you are right now. So think back on one of those moments of unfairness that you made it through and overcame to become who you are right now. Ready, set, go. So as our tradition, I get to ask Maureen some questions that came from her conversation with us. So it's delightful to hear about the family first philosophy. We've done the research around 7Fs, and family is always the highest satisfaction when we look at all the data, which is really cool. So tell us about where your kid's at now, and then just a little bit of inside baseball on this wedding you just had.
Well, my oldest daughter, Heidi, is working on her PhD in psychology at St. Thomas. She's still living at home, and so I'm really not an empty nester. And Ellie is graduating in May from the University of Missouri in journalism, and she was just accepted to Northwestern for the graduate program.
Awesome.
So I'm really happy about that. And Tom is an aviation major at Mankato. And Mankato has an amazing aviation program.
So they're all near, so
Yes.
they got to participate in this
Yes.
wedding. Tell us.
Well, it's supposed to be a surprise wedding. We were having a gathering. Bill has a big family. I have a big family. We were just going to have our siblings together to meet for the first time. We have been dating about 15 or 16 months, and so then we decided to pull kind of a Jennifer Aniston wedding, surprise. But then Father Malone said, well, I think you could come down to the church and get married.
Okay.
So then we had to tell him to show up at the church a half hour before the party, and then they kind of figured it out. But it was just our kids. Bill has 2 wonderful kids, and my 3. And then my nephew Jacob, who's been part of our family all along too. So it was just the kids and my siblings, and my parents came home from Florida for the weekend, so it was great.
You told me a story about your management philosophy and how that got formed when you had to fire someone. Would you finish that story for us?
Sure. It was my first termination, and it was with the demonstrators, all the wonderful women I told you about that worked in that program. And as I went into marketing, I had to hire a replacement as the demo coordinator, and I made a bad hire. And this woman was more of a dictator, and there was going to be a coup among the demo ladies, and you can't have mad demo ladies. So I had to let her go. And as I drove away from the office that night, she was sitting on the front steps crying, and I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to do this again. It was the saddest moment, and I thought, it was my bad hire, and from that day on, I think I only had to do it one more time in my career, and I did it a lot better, and hopefully. But I was able to find, everybody's good at something. And so if you can figure out if something, people just don't always work in jobs. So, but you can always find something they're good at and move them into those roles. And I tried to do that most of the time the rest of my career, but because when you have to terminate someone, it just isn't a good thing, as you all know.
Well, let's talk about the Super Bowl.
Yes.
So it seems rather new to us, but it's not new to you. What's been the most exciting moment so far?
The real excitement is seeing what has been the people in this state and what they build or manufacture or what they want to bring forward. We have had more people come through our door saying, we can do this for you. We'll volunteer to do this for you. Did you know, for example, that the endless summer hydrangea was developed here? And I found out that Bailey's Nursery was the guiding nursery for the Masters and Augusta. And they said, the azalea is the official flower of the Masters. You need an official flower, and it should be the purple hydrangea. And I was like, wow, you're right. And they could force bloom them and so on. We've talked to the Native Americans about being involved. We've talked to people that have developed the most unique products that we can actually promote. And I think that's been the most rewarding. Certainly you have your brush with fame occasionally when you see a celebrity at the Super Bowl or something, but
well, like who?
I had my picture taken with Donnie Wahlberg and Jenny McCarthy at the last. I'm really not good at recognizing athletes though, so I probably have seen a million and not.
Yeah, well, most of them are bigger than me. Let's just put it that way, right? So you mentioned the volunteer thing. We understand if you read about this that there's room for 10,000 volunteers. What can we do to help?
You know, the volunteers are our most important part of the Super Bowl because they're the first hello and they're the last goodbye. And what will bring people back to this state are the people. It's how we treat them. It's back to that same philosophy about treating people well and wanting to do business with you, wanting to, you know, come and live and be your neighbors. So those volunteers are really critical. And we do need 8,000 to 10,000. They didn't have enough in San Francisco, and it really showed. And Target has designed some beautiful uniforms. They're like Olympic kind of uniforms. They're great, which is our thank you gift to the volunteers. But they're really pop. So we have a website, mnsuperbowl.com. And you can go in and we'll send you a newsletter every quarter. And then summer of 17, we'll be asking for volunteers. We post all of our jobs on there. We post our business opportunities. There's a lot of business opportunities for particularly small business.
Good, we'll help you. I'll send it to all these people.
Great,
yeah,
great.
The Super Bowl is about as big as it gets. What, other than an untimely blizzard, what keeps you up at night?
Well, that's funny, because our partner McKinsey asked me the same thing last week. And certainly, it's a privately funded Super Bowl, so we're raising money, and we want to make sure we have enough not only to fulfill our promises that we made in the bid book, but also to do the things that we know will promote Minnesota. So that's always number one. And then the experience is the second thing. How do we move people? How do we ensure that we can draw 1 million people to Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington, and make sure that they can get around easily, that they have a great experience? We can't control the weather, although we have an official rabbi, we have an official nun, and we have a lot of our friends in the Native American community doing what they do. So, but we can't control the weather, so I'm not going to worry about it. It's either going to be a blizzard or it's not, but we'll handle it one way or another. But just the moving the people and making sure they say, wow, this is an easy city to get around in. Indianapolis still holds the title of the very best Super Bowl, and we're most like Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. We're close in, mm-hmm. The stadium is in town, so we have a fighting chance.
Yeah, game on, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, here we go.
Game on.
It's going to be a blink of an eye and the Super Bowl would be over. Mm-hmm. And you're still a young, vital leader. What can we expect from you in the future after that?
Well, if anyone has any ideas, I would really... Iskander said I could come back and work for him, but I think they're doing fine without me at the mall. So no, I just have to listen and see what happens.
Terrific. Thank you so much for being here. We're so grateful. Give it up for Maureen. Yeah. Outstanding.